All right, guys, welcome back. Welcome back. I promise you guys part two, like 2 weeks ago. But try to get back to our Therapy Tuesdays. So we'll give everybody just an opportunity to hop on. I know it's an odd time of the day to do these lives, but I'm trying to get on the schedule that I can try to be more consistent. And as always, you can catch it on the replay. Let me know that you do watch this by replay. And as always, as you join in, make sure you leave something in the comment so that I know that you are here. Say hello to me. I like to engage with you guys. And as I am going through the information that is being presented today, if you have any questions or anything pops up while I am going through, you can definitely put your questions or thoughts in the comments. Would love to try to answer some of those while we are live. So while people are joining, I will just kind of do a quick recap of like what we've been talking about. So for about the last month or so, I've been doing teachings on inner healing. One of the first teachings that I started out with was healing the inner child, and there's information and videos that's available for that. But this is part two of inner healing. And in the first video, we were talking about the effects of trauma on the soul. And so what I did in that video was just kind of gave a basic working definition of what trauma is and how that affects us. Well, today is part two of inner healing, and it's entitled The Body Keeps Score. And we're going to be talking about the wounded soul. So if you guys can remember, because you are great students, the soul is comprised of your mind, your will, and your emotions. Your soul is your mind, your will, and your emotions. One of the things that I have found that can be challenging when it comes to the body of Christ is that we have experts that talk about what happens spiritually. We have people that can walk you through deliverance, which addresses those compartments and things that are attached to our spirit. But what happens to our soul? Like after you've walked through deliverance, after you've gone to church, after you've done all the things that you know how to do spiritually, a lot of times many of us still find ourselves dealing with wounds. And that's because the wounds that we are experiencing are in fact related to our soul, which again is our mind, our will, and our emotions. So we're going to jump right into this teaching. I will be looking over here because I'm in my office and my screen setup is different than when I'm at home. But that was not going to be an excuse as to why I did not jump back on and bring you guys part two. Therapy Tuesday, part two. And as always, if there are things that you would love more information about when it comes to your mental health, when it comes to therapy, when it comes to medications, definitely allow me to assist you with that. There is a lot of information that I do know, and the information that I don't know, we can go on a journey together to make sure that you are getting reliable sources and also reliable resources that can help you if you are navigating through your own mental health. Definitely let me know how I can assist you. So I said all of that without even introducing myself. My name is Holly Brock. By profession, I am a licensed mental health therapist, but I'm also a board certified clinician. I have been in the mental health field for over 20 years. Literally, mental health is all I've ever done. I knew at an early age that I wanted to learn more about the field of psychology, and I have definitely committed my life's work into just being able to learn more about the brain, learning more about how we are wired through neurobiology, but also being able to take that information, digest it, and make it more palatable for people that maybe don't have that knowledge. Over the last couple of years, I have been on this journey with God to be able to present this information to the body. How do we merge or bridge the gap between mental health in the church. And so I feel that's kind of the niche that I'm in right now, and being able to help those who are believers understand that we are also, a being that has a soul, and being able to address the mind, the will, and the emotions. And so that's who I am. Definitely check out my website. Definitely let me know, like I said, if there's anything that I can do to better serve you on this platform. If there's other things that you would love to hear more about, I am always open for suggestions. Hey, Sis Verona, I finally got my comments working, so I'm happy that I can see my comments. Praise God, because they were not working. So thank you for hopping on. All right, guys. So let me cut my fan on because y'all, I've been getting hot. It be the spirit. All right. Today, we're going to be talking about inner healing, part 2. The body keeps score. And so we're going to be talking about the effects of trauma on the soul. And again, our soul is our mind, our will, and our emotions. So according to Bessel van der Kolk, expert on trauma and author of the renowned book, The Body Keeps Score, trauma is defined as an event that overwhelms the central nervous system, altering the way we process and recall memories. Trauma is an event that overwhelms our central nervous system, that affects the way that we are now able to process, but also recall memories. That little bit right there preaches all by itself. And that's why, again, I think it's so important to have these sort of outlets that can understand the body. Many of us have experienced trauma in some capacity, but don't fully recognize how that's left a mark on us. It affects central nervous trauma, affects our brain, right? Our central nervous system is also connected to the parts of our brain. And so that's why a lot of times when people also have experienced trauma, they suffer with anxiety. They may suffer even sometimes with depression, because all of those things are directly impacted by our central nervous. But what I think that is key as we move forward in this discussion today is that it affects or it alters the way that we process and recall our memories. So it affects our perception. So even right now, you're probably thinking about a situation where you had a recollection of an event and you were discussing that with somebody else, but their recollection of the event was totally different. How is it that two can be present for the same situation, two totally different experiences? How is it that two people can experience the same situation, like we were both there, but when you sit down and you ask me what happened, my recollection or my recalling of that event may be very different than somebody else that you speak to? Maybe it's because of my own pre-existing trauma, which has now affected my ability to recall what I actually experienced. Or it could be because in that moment, that experience was traumatic for me. The thing that you have to understand about the brain is beautiful for what it works for. The brain is so intricate and it has this whole desire to protect. The brain is designed for self-preservation. And so many times when a person has experienced any sort of trauma, the brain will in essence protect itself. So that's why it could be possible that although you experience something traumatic, you may not remember all the details. That's how the brain protects itself. Although the brain, you don't have a thought of it, your central nervous system takes note of that moment. That's trauma. That's also some of the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So I may not remember it, but the body keeps score, in essence, saying that even though I may not remember it here, there's an indelible mark that is now left on my central nervous system that without even being prompted, it recalls the feeling of that moment. Or maybe it is prompted. Maybe it now creates these triggers that happen because the central nervous system took note that on this day, this hour, this event happened. And so now, anytime that anything comes up that reminds the brain or even the central nervous system of something even close to that event, it has a reaction, right? It's a trauma response. Those are called triggers. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. Trauma is the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's inability to cope, causing feelings of helplessness, diminishes their sense of self and their ability to feel a full range of emotions and experiences. Some people develop symptoms, but they go away after a few weeks. This is called acute stress disorder. So that means it doesn't last as long. When the symptoms last more than a month and seriously affect the person's ability to function, the person may be suffering from PTSD. This is post traumatic stress disorder. So that means the stress of that event doesn't occur until after the fact. Some people with PTSD don't show symptoms for months itself after the event. That's how sometimes it's missed. So let's just say, for example, you had a bad car accident, right? I've been in a bad car accident, so that's why it came to mind. Let's just say you had a bad car accident today that was traumatic for you. You get out of the car, you're fine, car is really damaged, you're shaken up, but you think you're normal. Then maybe 2 months later, you are in the car driving and you hear brakes squealing behind you, like that, like when somebody's slowing down, like you hear that. Your threat response system is now activated. You panic, right? It's been 2 months since your car accident, but now because you hear the brakes squealing in the background, your brain goes into protection because, again, it's a traumatic experience. You weren't thinking about it, but your central nervous system, when you had the first car accident, took a screenshot. It took a memory of that event. So now your threat response system is now activated because of the trauma that you experienced 2 months ago. Post traumatic stress disorder had nothing to do with that current situation, but more so it's tied to the event that you experienced 2 months ago. And so you hear the brakes squealing and it automatically maybe takes you back to that experience when you had the car accident. Or it may not even be in that moment that you even remember or realize, man, why am I freaking out? Your heart's beating fast. Maybe you're clenching the steering wheel. Maybe you're sweating. Like there's a lot of different things going on. So you pull over and you're like, man, what is happening? Because you don't even realize what's going on. So you take a moment to calm down and then it hits you. Oh my God, this is from that car accident 2 months ago. So that's why it can be missed, because right after the incident, you got back in the car, you drove home, everything was fine. But now, again, 2 months later, something triggers you. The central nervous system is now activated, and there's this response. And then in one of the videos, too, we talked about what happens in the brain when we are triggered. And I'll just give you just a quick overview if you haven't watched that. So what I'm saying makes sense. So our brain, we have our prefrontal cortex, which is our logical brain. It's our left brain. That's where our thought is, our reason is, that's where language is. And so when I am logical, I'm in my left brain, my prefrontal cortex. Well, my right brain is my emotional brain. That's my amygdala. There is no language in the emotional brain. That's also where my threat response system is. That's where fight or flight is. And so if we look at the brain, these four knuckles would represent my prefrontal cortex. This right here, my thumb, would be the amygdala. The left brain protects my emotions, right? So the left brain, fully engaged, protects my right brain, which is my emotional brain. It looks like this. This would be the brain stem, and then on down would be my spine, and then my gut would sit right in here. Well, we know that there are neuroreceptors in our gut that send responses up to our brain. It all works well together, and our heart would be in the center. So typically, when I'm feeling panicky, my heart rate increases, right? Because of the panic. But all of that is a part of our central nervous system. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about trauma. Trauma affects all of these systems. It affects our brain, it affects our heart, it affects our gut. They're all connected. A lot of times when people have experienced any sort of trauma or they deal with anxiety, they feel it in their gut. Like they may have upset stomach, they have gastrointestinal issues, their heart rate may always be elevated, panic attacks. It's typically, I feel like I'm having a heart attack. That's what people a lot of times describe it as, because it increases the heart rate. So this is what it looks like when a person has been triggered and they've gone into fight or flight because they become less logical. So that's why you can't talk to a person who's panicky. But panic may not always look panic. They could be panicked in their brain, like all the alarms are going out, but you think they're there. But in all actuality, there is nobody home. So when you have a person that has been triggered, whether it be by trauma or some other reason, there is no you can't logically get through to them. They're in their right brain. It's all emotion. That's why people say, I'm in my feelings. Basically, they're telling you that they have moved over into their right brain where their emotion is, and no logic exists, right? Their prefrontal cortex is no longer engaged and their right brain is fully exposed. When my right brain is fully exposed, the emotions that I experience are more intense. So on a day that maybe I'm not triggered, I may be upset, but I'm able to feel it differently and I can control my anger. But if I've been triggered by my trauma, then the emotion that I feel is super intense. That's why you have these big explosions, these big displays of emotions because of how it feels. It feels a lot more intense. So let's talk about the different types of soul wounds that typically one can experience when it comes to trauma. Soul wound number one, the wound of rejection. Soul wound number one, the wound of rejection. Rejection can be defined as the act of pushing someone or something away. Rejection can also be the result of never being accepted. Rejection can be defined as the act of pushing someone or something away. Rejection can also be the result of never being accepted. Oh, that is so good. So we're talking about rejection. Rejection is a wound that happens within the soul, but it also can be traumatic. Never being accepted by a mother who didn't want you, that's traumatic, right? And many people have experienced that where maybe their mother became pregnant at a time where it wasn't convenient for her. And so, although she carried the baby, although she birthed the baby, although she may have taken care of the baby, she never wanted the baby, which creates a wound of rejection. In the first video, I talked about how we can be born with the spirit of rejection. We can be born with the spirit of rejection because neurobiology. A woman that's pregnant, she sends signals to the unborn fetus that she's carrying on the inside of her. And so if the signals that she's sending off through the placenta, if the signal that she's sending off to that unborn child is that I don't want you, or maybe she's even saying it within her heart, man, I really don't want this baby. Man, I really don't want to be pregnant right now. We have to be careful what we say because although we are saying it to ourselves, although we may think that what I'm saying is innocent, it's creating an internal wound of rejection to that unborn child. So it's possible that that baby now arrives with the wound of rejection because it knows due to the oh my god, I just lost my word, the signals that were sent to it during in utero that the mother didn't want it, then the baby now feels rejected. And I just can't imagine that a mother who didn't want the baby is going to show the same love and compassion and connectedness that she would to a baby that she did want. So wound number one is the wound of being rejected. So if we also have the ability to have the wound of rejection, sometimes people can carry the spirit of rejection. So one thing that we have to keep in mind is, okay, so there are some things that we need deliverance from, and then there are some things that we need therapy for. A person that has a spirit of rejection, that is absolutely something that you should seek deliverance for. But because you walk through the process of deliverance, that doesn't necessarily change the feelings that you experience. That doesn't necessarily change how you view yourself. If you've gone 30 years of your life feeling rejected and never feeling accepted, can I tell you that you may need to sit down and talk to somebody about that and process it? So the spirit of rejection, it is the sense of being unwanted and unable to receive love from others. Symptoms of the spirit of rejection include perfectionism, fear, withdrawing from life. Oh, here's one that we like to talk about in the church: pride. Did you know that most people that carry the spirit of pride is because they deal with the wound of being rejected? Did you know that most people who deal with pride, at the root of that is the wound of rejection? They have self-reliance. And what that looks like is, oh, I'm not going to ever ask anybody to help me. I got it. I can do it. I'll never depend on anybody. Can I tell you that I've been there? I was that person. Why was I that person? Because I went through a divorce, and coming out of that divorce, I felt rejected. So I made an internal vow that I will never, and I mean never, depend on anyone to do anything for me. Very independent. Not going to ask you to help me do anything. I'll work 10 jobs before I ask somebody for anything. Or I will hurt myself trying to lift something before I ask a man to lift it for me. That's where I was, because I was wounded, right? I was wounded. But that's what it looks like: self-relying. What about people pleasing? They people please in an effort to want to be accepted. Those are those people who can never say no. They really don't have the time in their schedule, but because they want to be able to do something for you and it is about them being accepted, now they become people pleasers. What about lust? People that struggle with lust, at the root of that many times is the spirit of rejection. Why lust? Because if I can be accepted even in that moment of intimacy, sex, whatever you want to call it, for them, at least I'm accepted in this moment. So they think. So you see people that are now hopping from bed to bed, right? They may not necessarily be sexual deviants, but at the root of that is about being accepted, because their self-esteem is so low, because they don't feel wanted. So anything that they can do to now feel wanted, they will do, even if that means being in the bed of others who at the root of it really don't want them in the way that they think they do. Insecurity, inferiority, and now it produces shame. We're talking about the spirit of rejection. So what are the symptoms of rejection? We named a few, but let's look at a few more. Those people typically are dissatisfied with who they are. They assess themselves as being meaningless, not having any value. They lack self-respect. That goes back to those people that, again, that are dealing with lust. They don't have any self-respect for themselves. So they will do anything to be in a moment where they feel accepted, because they no longer respect themselves. They consider themselves as a family freak, maybe the black sheep of the family. Defending yourself by refusal. They struggle with anxiety. And again, we're talking about some of the symptoms of PTSD, and anxiety is one of them, because they're always worried. They're always worried about what people are thinking about them. They're always worried about if I'm going to say the right thing, because they're so consumed with being accepted. Like, that's their whole focus. I have to be accepted. Anchoring in the material world through a sense of being busy. Oh, I've been there too. So by me being busy, it acts as somewhat of a distraction to keep from dealing with the reality of that maybe I'm not accepted. Because if I'm busy, I don't need to be accepted. I got this to do. I got that to do. Like, they have all of these things to do as a way to avoid the feeling of not being accepted. Then they become perfectionists. They have a fear of failure. They have a fear of getting things wrong. So everything that they do now has to be perfect. Because if I do everything perfectly, then it doesn't leave room for anyone to criticize me. Because even if the criticism is constructive, it comes across to them as being rejected. All right, next. Let me move this down a little bit. So Isaiah 49:15 states, "Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has born? Though she may forget you, I will never forget you." So this is a beautiful scripture for people that are feeling rejected. It doesn't matter if your family has rejected you. It doesn't matter if you feel that the world has rejected you, because here God is telling us he will never forget us. Isaiah 53:3. He was despised and rejected by mankind. We're talking about Jesus, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low self esteem. So Jesus himself was rejected, right? And we know that. So he had the experience of being rejected. So let's look at other people that we know of in the Bible that were also rejected. So Jesus was rejected, Joseph, Ishmael, David, and the Samaritan woman. So let's break them down one by one. So Jesus, right? I don't know if anybody was rejected more than Jesus. And although he was rejected then, he's still being rejected now because salvation is a choice. We have a choice whether or not we accept him. So either we accept him or we reject him. There is no middle ground. You can't say, well, I accept this part of the Bible, but I reject that. No, it doesn't work that way. It's all or nothing, right? And so he's still being rejected. But in the Bible, Jesus was rejected by Peter 3 times. We remember that. He was rejected by the Pharisees, Sadducees, and other religious leaders. So let's talk about Joseph. Like Joseph is like the epitome of being rejected by your family. Joseph was rejected by his brothers after his dreams so much that he was sold into slavery. And we know how Joseph's story turns out, which I think is absolutely beautiful. But if we were to put ourselves in the shoes of Joseph, he experienced a lot because he shared his dreams with his brothers. That's what jealousy looks like. And so we can't take it lightly who we share different things about ourselves with. You may not necessarily need to tell everybody about that book you're working on. Everybody might not need to know about your business plans. Sometimes it's best not to even talk about it until you have the finished product. People that know me know I am that person. And it's not because I am worried that somebody would try to come against what I'm doing. No, I am private by nature anyway. But at the same time, I just don't think it's necessary to invite unnecessary warfare. Sometimes doing what God has asked you to do comes with its own level of warfare. And so I think many of us, we talk too much. Like if there are people that are close in your circle, your leaders, people that you can trust and say, hey, I'm working on this. Can you be in agreement with me? Absolutely. But many of us, we talk too much. Every Facebook post you post is about what you're doing in your business. Every Facebook post is about what you're doing in your ministry. And I just think that there's certain things that until you've birthed the baby, like keep it, there's no reason to talk about it. That's what happened to Joseph. He didn't know, or he didn't have the discipline on knowing what to keep close to his heart, on what to keep private, knowing when to share. And so because he shared too much too soon and he shared it with people that couldn't see where he was going, sometimes, this is good. In many instances, we try to get people who can't see our vision to see our vision. And so you're sharing and you're sharing and you're painting pictures and they can't see. Sometimes them not being able to see is God's protection, because if they could see exactly what you were doing, or if they could see where God was taking you in this, then absolutely they would be in war against you. So definitely use your discernment in knowing who to share, when to share, right? Because Joseph found himself in a pit because he talked too much, but his story turned out good. What about Ishmael? Ishmael was the product of desperation. So let's look at Ishmael. He asked to be here. Ishmael didn't have nothing to do with why he was there. He didn't have nothing to do with it. But Sarai plotted and had Abraham have sex with Hagar. So our decisions may not necessarily birth rejection in us, but be careful of the decisions that you make, because the consequences of those decisions can be the spirit of rejection in somebody else. Can I come down your row just for a minute? my disclaimer, this is therapy, this is a safe place. But I'm gonna come for you just for a minute. Many of our children are struggling with rejection because of the decisions we made. We knew that Negro wasn't no good. We knew it. But we thought in our ignorance that, oh, I'm gonna have a baby with him. Okay. He is not the father that you thought he was going to be, right? We've learned now, we've repented, we've grown. That doesn't change the fact that those children now have a father who's not involved in their lives. And they don't understand that they know their father, but he doesn't want to come see them. That they know their father, but he doesn't want to be involved with them. So now they will wrestle with feeling rejected because of the decisions that you made. We have to think carefully about the decisions that we make, because my decisions don't just affect me. My decisions also affect everything that's connected to me. So again, if I am not choosing wisely, now that I know better regarding relationships, regarding who you decide to have children with, children will suffer the consequences. Or maybe you are the child who doesn't know who your father is. And now internally you struggle with feeling rejected, right? Because of the decisions that your mother made. So your mother, in her brokenness, made decisions that met a temporary need because she felt rejected. And so she found herself in situations to be accepted. Maybe that temporary decision to be accepted resulted in you being born. So here you are living your whole life with daddy issues, with father wounds, because of the decisions that your mother made. So now you carry rejection. And then what happens? Because you struggle with feeling rejected and not being accepted, you repeat the cycle. It's a generational curse. We have to be so mindful the decisions that we make, because they not only affect us, but they affect everything that's connected to you. Ishmael, he was the illegitimate child. God ended up blessing him, but can you imagine growing up knowing that you you are the child of the mistress? And then there's a scripture, I don't remember where it is, but like Sarah was like hot. Like, you did this. Because then she went to Abraham. She was like, oh, no. Look at her. Look at Hagar. She walking around here like she missed, such and such. She was mad. So she grew discontentment in her heart. Ma'am, you did this. This is the work of your own hands. So now God, we know how the story goes. God cleans it up and he blesses them with Isaac. So point of, be careful of the decisions that you make. So what about David? It was described as a man after God's own heart, some stuff. But in my reach of David, it almost sounds like David was also a child that was kind of like conceived in like an illegitimate relationship, because David talks about how he was born in sin and shaped in iniquity. And I quoted it specifically in one of my last videos, but I have to go back and look at how it actually happened. But David was illegitimate. So we talked about how if your mother is carrying you and maybe she's already dealing with rejection and she's not accepting of the pregnancy, how it transcends, through the placenta to that unborn child. So David was already born with the spirit of rejection because of how he was conceived. And then his whole life, he's doing these different things. He caught up with Bathsheba, but at the root of that was rejection. David was doing any and everything to feel accepted. So then he was rejected by Saul, right? Not Saul, by Samuel. So Samuel came to the house to anoint a son of the house of Jesse. And then King Saul was like, these all the kids you got? because Jesse had a whole bunch of kids. And that was the other thing too. David was the last born to the house of Jesse. He was the youngest. So he has all of these brothers who were birthed by the same mother and father. And here he is over here with a different mama. So he's like the stepbrother. So we can already imagine how he was feeling. So then Samuel shows up to anoint the new king, and he's looking at him, and he chose another one of his brothers, and he was like, oh yes, that is him. And God was like, no, it ain't. That ain't him. So here comes David, and he's like, this all you got left? So imagine being in that moment where you all lined up with your siblings and they're going down the line. Oh yes, oh yeah, I can pick him. Oh, I can pick her. And they get to you and they're like, you ain't got this. This is all you got left. So what kind of wound does that create now in David, knowing that he wasn't good enough? And again, many of us have those internal wounds. Maybe your situation wasn't quite like David's, but you probably can think of a situation where you felt that you were equally qualified, where you felt that you were good enough, but they looked at you. And because they couldn't see the God on the inside of you, maybe you were passed up for that promotion. Maybe you were passed up for that opportunity. And it created a wound of rejection on the inside of you because in that moment you felt that you didn't measure up. So King Saul rejected David because he did not think he was qualified to fight Goliath. So he was rejected by Samuel and he was rejected by King Saul. All right. So then the Samaritan woman. This is probably one of my favorite stories in the Bible. So we know that the Samaritan woman was at the well. She was the woman of the well. And Jesus had been traveling all day and he meets her at the well. And so, they're not supposed to talk because it was a customs at the time that a woman. So Jesus is having this conversation with her and she's like, why are you talking to me? That Jews and Samaritans cannot. And so they go on and then he's like, hey, where your husband at? And she's like, see, let me tell you guys. So Jesus, listen, let me tell you what had happened. See, what had happened was, and he's like, you know what? So where is he? And she's like, I don't have a husband. And then and Jesus is like, you know what? You right. You have spoken correctly. You not only do you not have a husband, but you've had 5. You've had 5 husbands. And there's a lot of different theories that talk about who the 5 husbands were. Was it that she had been married 5 times? Like maybe they died in battle, maybe something happened to them. It was doing what she do. And meaning that they believe to somebody else. Like, I don't know. If you're watching, if you're a Bible scholar, tell me what your theory is. Did the Samaritan woman, has she been married 5 times? Or was it that she was living her best life and she was in these relationships with men? I'm going to tell you my theory. I think that she wasn't married 5 times. I think that the husbands that she had were other women's husbands. I'm going to tell you why I think that. Because he tells her, you have had 5 husbands, and the one you got right now is not your own. What do you think? So in order for her to be with a husband that's not her own, that means she with somebody else's husband that she wasn't married to. But again, I'm open to a good theological debate about what you think about her situation with these husbands. And the other thing that we know about her, that she was living her best life because she was rejected by the community. Because in those times, it was the hottest part of the day. People didn't go and draw water at that time of the day. But she went during that time of the day because there would be less people there. So she went out at a time where not a whole bunch of people around the well talking about her and who would have anything to say about how she's living her life. Hey, Marsha, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. All right. So that was soul wound number 1. For those of you that are hopping on, go back and watch the first 40 minutes. It's great. So we're moving on to soul wound number 2, the wound of abandonment. Abandonment trauma involves experiences that make us feel unsafe, insecure, and alone in childhood. This can become overwhelming and lead to symptoms of anxiety and distrust. So, on another one of my videos, I talked about when abandonment wounds are created. So, Erik Erikson is a well known psychologist from like the 1970s, and he broke down these 8 stages of psychological development. In those stages, he talked about how different traumas or different events occurring during different stages can, in essence, arrest our development, right? And so abandonment typically can happen earlier in life. Let's just say, maybe there are situations with your parents and you end up in foster care. And so it creates this wound of abandonment. Or maybe at a certain stage in your life, like maybe one of your parents went to jail, or maybe one of your parents passed away, or it could be a caretaker. Like many of us were raised by our grandparents. So if your grandparents passed away, but it creates this wound of abandonment, whatever the circumstances is, because you feel like you've been left and you've been abandoned. Psalms 27:10, though my father and mother abandon me, the Lord gathers me up. So this is telling us that regardless of how we ended up in a situation that we felt abandoned, the Lord gathers us up. So if you are experiencing feelings of abandonment, that is not a burden that you were ever designed to carry. We have to have the ability to, number one, recognize what I'm experiencing and what I'm dealing with, so I know what to pray for and pray about, but to also be honest with God about how you're feeling. He knows anyway, right? But for us to be in denial about the things that we are experiencing only keeps us bound. Being in denial keeps me bound. Somebody need to write that down. That can be your Facebook post for today. Just give me credit for it. Being in denial, it only keeps you bound. Okay? All right. People with abandonment issues may experience problems in relationships because they fear that the other person will leave them. So if I'm dealing with feelings of abandonment, most of those people self-sabotage those relationships. They have the mentality that I'm going to do you before you do me. And it may not even necessarily be that the person has done anything. Now, remember, trauma, when I've been traumatized, it affects my perception. It affects my ability to recall emotions and events. So, although this person may not necessarily have done anything to cause me to feel abandoned, my perception, because my central nervous system has kept score of those moments where I have been abandoned, it shows up in a relationship. Holly, what does that look like? You're in a relationship. Maybe you just started in the relationship, been dating a couple of months. He tells you, I'm gonna call you when I get off work. I'm gonna call, and he gets off work at 5 o'clock. So 5:30 rolls around, you getting anxious. 6 o'clock rolls around, you kind of in between anxiousness and worry. You text him, hey, are you off? No response. 7:30, 8 o'clock rolls around, you are livid. Why are you livid? Because you feel abandoned. Well, you seething, you ready for when he do call. So he calls and you go off. You blankety blank blank blank. You ain't nothing but a liar. I thought you. And he's like, I just got off. We had to work mandatory overtime. I didn't get a chance to text you. Who row am I on? Who's row on? He tells you, I did. I just got off work. I'm so sorry. I was just getting ready to call you. But because you had all of these thoughts that have now formulated in your mind and you've allowed them to grow, maybe because in your last relationship, he was unfaithful or she was unfaithful. So the fact that they told you they were going to call and they didn't was a trauma response for you, because that last relationship traumatized you. That last relationship you poured your all to. That last relationship you gave them your heart and they mishandled it. So now, anytime something comes up that causes you to feel that the person is doing the same thing, you lose it. It's trauma. Your body has taken score of the traumatic experiences that you've dealt with before now. And then compounding to that, maybe the issues that you brought into the other relationships that go back to your inner child that were never dealt with, that inner child that's still abandoned. So this brother, this sister is catching all of it, right? And now you have to back down because they're like, what is going on? And now you feel embarrassed. Now you feel ashamed because you realize you've overreacted. But what most of us do is that we look away from that and we go on living life, not addressing what is at the root of that. Why did I react that way? What caused me to show out in that way? Why was I triggered by this? Why did I think that he was being unfaithful? We don't do the inner work to get to the root of it because we've accepted this as a part of my personality. This is normal. Sis, brother, that ain't normal. God never designed you to be that way. That's a wound. And just like any wound, if it's recent, it's going to hurt worse. If you have a wound in the natural and I come up and poke it, you're going to be like, oh man, that hurts. But it's one thing to know that you have a wound and you can see it and I touch it. It's another when you don't even realize that there's hurt that's deep seated within your soul. Oh, I'm talking to y'all today. It's one thing to be aware that there's an area in my soul that's unhealed. So because this area is unhealed, I'm going to sit down somewhere. I'm going to go through deliverance. I'm going to get in therapy. I'm going to address the wounded parts of my soul so that I don't go on living life as normal. And not only am I recreating the wounds for me, now I'm creating new wounds for everybody that I come in contact with because I'm unhealed. We have to take responsibility for our wounds. It's not our fault that we were wounded. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. There are many things that we experience that we have no control over. People have free will. Somebody that took advantage of you or mishandled your heart, we can't control that. The wounds that we experience in our childhood, I get it. You didn't have any control over that, but you do have the responsibility to heal. That is on you. Marshall, I'll come back to your question in just a second, but I do see it. I'm going to answer it in just a second. Let me go to my next slide. So, fear of abandonment is not a standalone mental health condition such as depression, but it is a form of anxiety and even a phobia in some senses. So we know that a phobia is something that you have extreme fear of. Some people fear like snakes. And so my example of being afraid and having a phobia, like for example, I'm afraid of aggressive dogs. I'm afraid of them. Like I think everybody should be of aggressive dogs. In the sense that if your dog is growling and barking at me, like I'm gonna need you to get your dog. But I don't have a phobia of dogs. Like I love dogs. Like I don't have an issue with dogs, but I am fearful of aggressive dogs. So let's look at that as a more natural sense. So somebody can be somewhat afraid of being hurt in a relationship. I think it's somewhat not uncommon to maybe have a fear or awareness that in relationships, there's a possibility that I can be hurt. It becomes a phobia when you completely avoid any relationships so that you don't get hurt. Friendships, you don't make relationships with your coworkers. At church, you go in, you worship, you pray, and you go home. Like you don't make any form of connections with anybody. That's a phobia because you are so afraid to the 10th degree of being hurt. So that's the difference of having a rational fear and a phobia. A phobia is an irrational fear. Fear is one thing, but when it becomes a phobia, your fear is irrational. And when I say irrational, I think about people going back to the dog. Like there are some people who are afraid of puppies, like a little bitty puppy, right? They have a phobia. Like the puppy cannot hurt them. The puppy's little. And I know people, even if they see a puppy, they about to tear your front door down. They have a phobia. And at the root of that, they may have been attacked by a dog, right? And because they were attacked at an earlier stage in life, because the body keeps score, whenever the brain recognizes that this is a puppy, it doesn't process that it's a little dog and it can't hurt you. The brain is like, oh, that's the same thing that bit you last time. So the central nervous system kicks in, flight or flight. They're not logical because you're trying to tell them it's a puppy, it's a puppy. They're not hearing nothing you got to say because they're over in the right brain. The amygdala takes over and they panic. So that's what it looks like. And it can be that also in relationships. All right, Marsha, I'm going to answer your question before I go on to the next one. Will someone who feels abandoned feel rejection and vice versa? Can the two be interchangeable? Absolutely. They almost go hand in hand together. So, for example, if a person was abandoned, let's say the abandonment came first. Let's just say, let me give you more of a complicated scenario. And then when I finish, let me know if that helps. So let's just say you have a parent that your caretaker passes away. Like you had a great relationship with them, but maybe unexpectedly as a teenager, one of your caretakers passes away, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's a parent. So now you feel abandoned because they left you. Because they left you, that wound is already there. You feel abandoned. It doesn't matter that maybe they were sick, like none of the rational reasons as to why they're gone. It doesn't matter. You feel abandoned. So because you feel abandoned, in an effort to protect yourself, you now go about life keeping up walls, like you keep everything out. So rejection is not only being rejected by others, rejection can also be the inability to be accepted. So nobody has done anything to reject you, but you won't allow yourself to be accepted because you don't want to ever be left again. That fear of abandonment. So abandonment and rejection go hand in hand, although the abandonment comes first. So let's look at it vice versa. Let's just say you were rejected at an early age. Let's say maybe your dad wasn't in your life, right? And so you have a wound of being rejected or feeling rejected because your father wasn't in the picture. So now you're going about life not ever feeling accepted. Same situation, you make it impossible for other people to accept you because it's like, I'm going to do you before you do me. And because in your mind, you're protecting yourself, you're still keeping everybody out, but a person can only take so much. So let's just say you're in a relationship and you come into the relationship with like daddy issues because you have the wound of being rejected. Well, this guy's trying to love you. He's trying to do everything that he can. Well, in your mind, you're afraid that he's going to reject you, so you keep him out. He says, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. He leaves the relationship. Guess what happens? You feel abandoned. Not realizing that you kind of created this scenario because he's trying to get in, but you have your fortress up, your force field, because you feel rejected. So I'm going to make sure you can't reject me because I'm not going to accept you. In actuality, you rejected him, but because he got tired of it, you now perceive that as abandonment. Does that make sense? Let me know if that makes sense for you. I hope that helped. All right. So people that deal with abandonment, individuals who have experienced abandonment in childhood may find themselves drawn to people who will treat them poorly and eventually leave them. Right? Because at the root of that is abandonment. And so that's when a lot of times you see people, more so women than men, but men can find themselves in a situation too, where they get in relationships with people that are narcissistic, or they get in relationships with people who are abusive towards them. But at the root of that is because of that inner child not being healed. Oh, you got to go watch the video on healing the inner child. But I'm going to give you a quick explanation of why these people get in relationships with others who treat them poorly. You're welcome, Marsha. So if I have my inner child was wounded, so the wound that I experienced happened in early childhood, it creates a wound. Well, the inner child, his whole job is to grow up eventually, into a functioning adult. Well, if that inner child is wounded and it doesn't fully grow, develop the, it's almost like the person up on the outside, but on the inside, emotionally, they never grow up. Again, arrested development. Well, when a person experiences inner wound, they now have an adaptive child that like comes to the rescue. It's kind of like the big brother, big sister scenario. The adaptive child, their focus is to protect the wounded child. So I was wounded. I create this persona, this other internal person that now protects myself, right? And so when I do this, you deal with the person who, although on the outside they look 35, but on the inside they 8. And that's why it seems like they are childish. Well, in essence, they are, because the inner child on the inside of them is puppeteering. The inner child controls them. And so if my inner child never developed, or if my inner child is still living on the inside of me wounded, it shows up when I've been triggered because it's a trauma response. And so that's what's dealing with the inner child. But why do these people now end up in relationships with others that are bad for them? In most cases, they trauma bond. So I have the inner wounded child. You have the inner wounded child. You understand my trauma. I understand your trauma. We would be great together. No, trauma plus trauma does not equal healed. Trauma plus trauma does not equal whole. No, not how that works. Well, what they do is that because they both have these inner child that haven't been healed, they love bomb. So what does love bombing look like? Narcissists are great with love bombing. So what they do is they will, lay it on heavy in the beginning. Like they're speaking your love language, they're calling, they're sending flowers, doing all the dates. They are, oh my God. But the moment that you do something that causes them to feel threatened or triggered, they shut it down. So they give you all of this stuff on the front end, but the moment that you upset them or you hurt them, they remove their love from you. This is love bombing, but it's because they have a trauma bond. They bonded because they have a shared trauma. And so people get caught up in these type of relationships because when they remove their love and then they come back, it creates and releases oxytocin. Oxytocin is the emotion or the hormone, it's the love hormone. And so disrespected me, you've called me out my name, you've done all of these things, but now you're sorry and oh my God, I love you. I can't lose you. Well, it feeds that inner child. Right? The inner child needs that. The inner child needs to be loved. The inner child needs to be appreciated. The inner child needs to feel wanted. And so now it creates this toxic relationship between the two of them. And one will stay no matter what this guy does, no matter how nasty he is, no matter how abusive he is. She finds herself stuck because of the love bombing. I love you. And then I drop the bomb. That's love bombing. So that's why it can be difficult to people to remove themselves from these unhealthy, toxic relationships because they feel that any love, even if it's unhealthy, is better than no love. So people that are experiencing abandonment, they're always wanting to please others. They're people pleasers. They give too much in relationships. They have an inability to trust, pushing others away to avoid rejection. And that was a comparison that we gave about those that have rejection and abandonment. They feel insecure in romantic partnerships and friendships. Codependency. That's a big one. A need for continual reassurance that others love them and will stay with them, right? That's the needy person. And then sometimes they need to control others. Come on, Jezebel spirit. Like they have the need to be in control. And people that struggle with narcissism, they also have the need to be in control. Soul wound number 3, being humiliated, the wound of humiliation. So what does being humiliated mean? It means to reduce someone to a lower position in one's own eyes or other eyes, or to make someone ashamed or embarrassed. A feeling of shame as a result of being disgraced race or the feeling sometimes leads to severe depression and deterioration of the individual sense of self-esteem. So people that deal with feeling humiliated, I believe that most of them probably experience that in childhood. Like if they had a parent or caregivers who are verbally abusive, who always called them dumb, who called them stupid, you ain't nothing, or, you just like your daddy, just all the negative things that they spewed and spoke verbally over them. It humiliated them, especially if they did this in front of others. What I don't think many people talk about is the humiliation that can come from siblings. I think about Joseph, but there are many of us who have sibling groups where, especially if like you're the younger, where you had older siblings who humiliated you because they had their own, inner child things that they were dealing with, but they humiliated you and embarrassed you in front of others, but it creates a wound. When we are humiliated, we can almost feel our heart shriveling. For many months, sometimes years, we may be preoccupied or obsessed by humiliation and its real or imagined perpetrators. We may react with anger, fantasies of revenge, sadism, delinquency, or terrorism, among others. So let's put a plug right here. So when you see these children, and this is just to kind of put it in context, what humiliation does to an individual psychologically. 9 times out of 10, when you see these stories or these situations where, you have a child that goes into a school and shoots up the school, 9 times out of 10, at the root of that child had been severely bullied by his peers. Please, again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not making an excuse for it. I'm trying to give you context. I'm a person that tries to paint pictures so that you can understand where I'm coming from. And if I can connect the lines, you'll be like, oh, okay, I get it, because I want you to get it. So if you think about these children who go in schools and they have like these mass shootings, many times they had been humiliated in front of their peers. They had been teased, they had been bullied, they had done all of these things. On the other end of that, you see children who commit suicide. And at the root of that, when they go through and they do the post-morbid review and they try to figure out like what happened, they had been teased, they had been taunted, like they had been humiliated in front of their peers. And so because they become preoccupied and obsessed with their humiliation, it can also lead to fear, anxiety, flashbacks, nightmares, sleeplessness, suspicion, and paranoia, social isolation, apathy, depression, and then finally suicidal ideation. But that's what humiliation. So, what happens when humiliation takes place in the church? What happens when humiliation takes place in the church? Maybe you were humiliated by a church leader. And maybe, they felt that they were justified in calling you out, in front of everybody. But how does that now affect your relationship with that church? But also, how does that now affect your relationship with God? Because you were humiliated in front of a group of your peers. And now you are expected to go back and serve and worship like nothing happened. Many people have left church, not God. Many people have left church because they were humiliated at some point. Yes, I understand that people can sometimes use church hurt as an excuse, and it's not the church that hurts people, it's the people in the church that hurt people. But nonetheless, they have experienced church through the organization. Kimberly, it's a long story. Nonetheless, they have experienced humiliation at some point. And so now, because of that humiliation that took place in an environment that they felt they should be safe and feel protected, it can make it difficult for them to now like maybe leave in part of a different religious organization. So again, that's what humiliation may look like. Humiliation can also manifest as shame in victims of sexual or physical abuse. So people that have experienced sexual or physical abuse, especially at a young age, but even at any age, you can be traumatized sexually or physically. It can create humiliation, even if nobody else watched it. Sometimes people perceive that everybody else knows. That's that paranoia, like, oh, they know what happened to me. And in most cases, people don't know. But it's because of what's going on in the brain, that self-preservation. The brain's whole goal is try to protect you. And so even in environments where it may not even be related to that situation, once you feel triggered, it can be difficult to pull you back in. Humiliation is an act that causes a change for the worse in the position of the victim and in the victim's feelings about himself and his relationship to the world. Since power is central to humiliation, the victim of an act of humiliation can be described not as feeling, but as being humiliated. Like they don't feel humiliated. I was humiliated. So now it's an act of being. That's why it's difficult for them to get over, because it's not a feeling that they're trying to get over, it's a state of being. Does it make sense? People that have experienced humiliation don't feel humiliated, they are humiliated. So it's not anything for them to get over, because it's not a feeling that's going to pass, it's a reality. Humiliation results in a person feeling powerless. People that often have been humiliated, they want control because their power was taken in that moment, whether it was physically, whether it was verbally, whether it was sexually. My power was taken, right? And I'm never going to be in a position that anybody has the ability to take my power. Humiliation can also manifest as shame in victims of sexual or physical abuse. I'm going to stop 1 second and see if we have any questions. Any questions? Any questions? And I'm sending my staff a note because I was supposed to be done at 1 o'clock, but we're going to finish this. Hang on 1 second. Any questions? I appreciate y'all letting me multitask. I hope this is helping y'all just a little bit. All right. I got one more. I got to be done at 1:15. All right. All right. I'll give y'all 15 more minutes and then we got to be done. This is going long. All right. Where we are. Okay. Humiliation. All right. We got like a few more slides. So, symptoms of humiliation: the impression of being constantly observed and embedded, doing everything to be worthy in the eyes of God or those he loves. Because once I've been humiliated, my whole goal now is to be accepted, right? Serving everyone you love, restraint in words. So I'm not going to say a whole lot, because if I'm in front of others, the less I say, the less that you have the ability to not humiliate me because I haven't said anything. The tendency to justify others. So if I can come to your defense and rescue, because maybe you're being attacked, then it takes the attention off of me because I'm like the savior, right? Because you don't have control in that moment. So let me jump in and now help you gain control back. These are people that have been humiliated. Fear of punishment for the excessive joy of life. So that means that because now I'm living life like, oh, I should not be this happy. And they are afraid that someone may try to now rob them of that moment and humiliate them. So either they live life to a lower degree as not to make much noise, or when they do certain things, they hide it and keep it to themselves. Marsha, do you have a question? How to overcome the without being loud and aggressive to be heard? So are you asking how to overcome feelings of humiliation without being loud and aggressive? If so, just give me a yes and I'll come back and answer it. Putting the needs of others above your own, compensates for different needs, a talent for making people laugh, but often by mocking or humiliating themselves. So those are the people that are like the jokester of the bunch. They're the clown. It's a defense mechanism in that if we're laughing, or I can talk about myself, y'all, I can't believe I done gained all this weight. Like we make a joke about things that we're really sensitive about, because if I can point out the obvious before you do, then I've stolen your power. Like you talking about me gaining weight ain't really funny because I've already talked about it, right? Those are those people who are always putting themselves down, but they do it in a joking manner so that way it gives them a hands up. Because if I already talked about the elephant in the room, then in their mind, it takes the sting out of it. Even if you have something to say, like we already talked about it. All right. Let me answer these questions, and we're going to be to soul wound number 4. So the thing that you have to learn, or I think that might be helpful, Marcia, is learning how to use assertive communication. Assertive communication is being able to verbalize what it is that you need in that moment, or being able to defend yourself without being aggressive and without being loud. Because once you've been triggered, it can be very difficult to now kind of pull it back in. Because again, if somebody is doing something that has hit that button and your reaction is now loud and aggressive, that means you have definitely be triggered. But what they'll then you and do, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, they'll take what you're doing in that moment and make it all about you being loud and aggressive. And we never get to the point of the reason why you were triggered in the first place, because the loud and aggressiveness now takes the focus away from what it was you were trying to communicate initially. So being able to utilize assertive communication. When you know that you've been triggered, sometimes it's best in those moments just to say, you know what? I need a minute. If it's a conversation that you have the ability to come back and visit later, that can be helpful. Another tool that I found helpful is if you know that you need to have a difficult conversation with somebody and they know what buttons to push, write down what you want to say. I mean, I would go in it with a sticky, the things that you felt needed to be addressed. And that way, when they start pulling you out of your left brain and you become emotional, having it wrote down, it forces your logic to get back engaged. It forces your mind to now look at what you wrote down and process it. So writing it down, having it in front of you can be a very effective tool so that they can't pull you over into that right brain when you've been triggered. But again, if you have the ability to say, hey, can we come back to this conversation, or do you have a minute? Can I process this, or can we talk about this later? Just being able to recognize, how or what the triggers are for you. Like if you know if a subject is going to come up that's going to be a trigger for you, like I said, already have wrote down how you're going to respond, because most people go for that same button. Once they know that saying this or doing this is going to make you mad, they're going to go for it every time. And you leave that meeting or that conversation with nothing accomplished but you mad. Right? So knowing that they're going to do it, you got to outthink them, put one hand in front of the other. So just get a step ahead of them, but whatever you do, don't allow them to pull you over into that emotion. And when you feel yourself going there, say, hey, you know what? I need a minute. Or don't be so quick to reply. Because typically in conversation, we start getting upset because we want to defend ourselves, because maybe they've accused us of saying something, or they accuse us of doing something. And we're like, we want to come and defend ourselves. No, it's not true. That's not what I meant. You misunderstood me. No, stick to the facts. Get your little sticky note. Let them say what they're saying, and you move on to point number 2. Because once they realize, wait a minute, I'm hitting this trigger button, it's deactivated. It's going to throw them off. But you'll be able to accomplish everything that you need to in that moment, and you leave like boom, and you got it resolved. All right, what else? Miss Kim, once you've acknowledged that you have been hurt and working through your processes with therapy, spirituality, and Jesus, what are some things you can do to enter relationships, friendships, or church in a healthy manner? The first thing that I would do is pray about those friendships, relationships, or churches and ask them, are they God's will for you? I think that although we've come to a point where maybe we've healed, we can be quick to want to go back and repair certain things. Now, when it comes to family, I know it's a little bit more difficult because we want to engage with our family, but just because they're family doesn't mean you have to have a relationship with them. I think it's important that you pray about it, number one, to ask God, is this the ministry or church that you would have for me? Is this a friendship that you would have me to be involved in? And then if God is saying, well, he gives you an answer, maybe he's saying, yes, you have the green light. You need to be very clear about establishing your boundaries, very clear about your boundaries. Because we have to teach people how to treat us. And so they may think that you're the person that they knew 5 years ago and that they can talk to you any kind of way and you're going to respond. I've been on a journey. I'm healed. Here are my boundaries. And stick to them. Yes, please be very clear about your boundaries. People don't have to, what's the word? They don't have to like your boundaries, but they have to respect them. If a boundary of yours, like for a family member, here's a big one, like maybe you're rebuilding relationships with family and you decide to invite everybody over. Hey guys, after church on Sunday, we're going to, I'm invite you guys over to dinner. Wow, said uncle. He don't care nothing about that. Like he don't know the Lord. He dropping F bombs and you are uncomfortable, right? And there may be history there, but whatever, uncle, I'm so glad you came today, but there is no cussing in my house. What you mean? Uncle, I appreciate you being here. There is no cursing in my house. But where we lose it is that we get into this argument and now we're right brain because how you gonna tell me what you not gonna do in my house? Uncle, I'm gonna ask you not to curse in my house. If you choose that you need to curse, I'm going to ask you to leave and mean it. No kiki ha ha. No, there is no cursing in my house. And the next time he drops the F bomb, all right, Unc, it's been good seeing you. I'm going to need you to leave. And sometimes it gets to that point and we feel bad. Oh, I can't believe, that I'm having to ask so-and-so to leave, or you may have family. Girl, how you going to put him out? This is my house. These are my boundaries. I don't cuss. I don't want to hear you cussing or whatever it is. But once you establish your boundaries, you got to be consistent. The moment that you become inconsistent with your boundaries, it's like you've tore down some of the force field. They don't longer have power. They don't have any power if you are not consistent. And as you go through your journey of healing and deliverance, you may have to create boundaries to maintain your healing and your deliverance. Right? And that may mean you don't have certain relationships. That's okay. Because if you can't expect what I need to be healthy, healed, and whole, then I don't need you in my life. And I don't owe you an explanation. Period. I don't owe you an explanation. All right, guys, this is good. Soul wound number 4, the wound of betrayal. Betrayal is when someone you trust lies to you. Oh, I'm on somebody's row. I'm on your row. Just stay with me. This is therapy. This is a safe space, and I got you. Betrayal is when someone you trust lies to you, cheats on you, abuses you, or hurts you by putting their own self-interest first. Talk about abandonment. Talk about rejection. Now I feel betrayed. Betrayal is seen as a loss. Betrayal is probably the most devastating loss a person can experience. But why though? Because you trusted them. Like, if I don't really know you like that, you can't betray me. Like, if I don't really know you and you say, Holly, I'm going to call you back or I'm going to come see you, but we really don't have that kind of relationship, I'm not really going to feel some type of way. But if I know you and I love you and you say that we here and you like, Holly, I'm going to come help you with that project when I get off work. Or, here's where we oftentimes feel betrayed. What if you got a friend, right? Or maybe somebody that you had a relationship with, dating, friendship, and you go through something in life. Like, I wouldn't necessarily call it a secret, but let's just say it's a private matter. Just between you two. Like, maybe they know something about you that's a private matter. Oh, y'all know where I'm going with this. And they get mad at you. So they get on Facebook being kind of passive aggressive. I just don't understand how people bop. And they talking about you. Or maybe your personal matter, your private matter, everybody in the family know. But I only told this one person. So how all y'all know that's betrayal? Because you trusted them. You opened up your heart and you shared something with them that was a private matter, but they betrayed you by telling everybody. Does that make sense? That's what betrayal looks like. Similar to the forms of trauma can occur after experiencing an event of betrayal of one's primary relationship that one considers extremely disturbing or damaging. So maybe the information that they leaked, it could be damaging to your person. It could be damaging to your character. Like, it's something that you didn't want anybody to know. But because they were upset with you, they took that information and betrayed you. The other thing that comes with betrayal is blackmail. So maybe they want something from you. And if you don't let me get that money, I know what you did. If you don't X, Y, and Z, I'm going to go tell them about such and such, right? That's blackmail. Research suggests betrayal trauma symptoms are deeply impactful and can have long-term effects to one's mental health. Manipulation, absolutely. Experiencing betrayal, a form of emotional abuse, can cause various post-traumatic stress disorders. Symptoms such as flashbacks, nightmares, and impaired sleeping, depression, anxiety, brain fog, distrust, disassociation are common. Betrayed partners often feel as if their reality has been shaken to its core. All right. Uh-oh. Here we go. I lost my slide. Where is it? The forms of betrayal in relationships they have discovered has exposed their partner as someone they do not recognize, which can be disorienting and heartbreaking. So now they can't believe that this person would share their information. Proverbs 19:5, a false witness will not go unpunished, nor will a liar escape. Matthew 6:14-15, the Amplified Bible. For if you forgive others their trespasses, their reckless and willful sin, so we got to forgive these people, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, nurturing your hurt and anger with the result that it interferes with your relationship with God, then your Father will not forgive your trespasses. So we know that me being able to forgive others, regardless of how the wound was there, it's not about them. Me being able to forgive is about me and my relationship with God. Because if I'm holding on to the things that have been done to me, I'm harboring unforgiveness in my heart, then it's impossible for me to not to go to God and ask him for forgiveness. Forgiveness is about you. And don't forgive expecting an apology. We cannot forgive expecting them to give us an apology, because if your forgiveness is based off of the need to have an apology, you'll be disappointed every time, and the wound is only going to be deepened. It's not about that. It's about releasing them and allowing God to deal with it. And I'm going to share this. And y'all, I still got like 10 slides, but I got to stab me. So I'm going to come back and do these 10 slides. I promise. But I'm going to say this. I've gone through a season where I had to learn. I had to walk out what it means to be blameless. I had to walk out what it means to be betrayed. I had to walk out what it means to be hurt. But I had to forgive because it wasn't about me. Because one thing that I understand is that hurt people. And many of the things and the grudges that you're holding against others, because they're unhealed. They have wounds. So they're wounding you from a place of their own woundedness. And if we are not able to see them as people that have woundedness, then we'll take it personally and we'll hold on to that. And then we live our lives in unforgiveness. If I don't forgive others, then it's impossible for God to forgive me. All right, guys, you have been great. Man, I'm so happy. Listen, I'm going to come back. Let me see what time I'm going to come back. Because I got to finish this, but I got a staff meeting. I didn't think it was going to take this long, but y'all been so engaging. I'm so happy. I'll come back at 3 Eastern Standard Time. So that's in about 2 hours. If you guys can come back at 3 Eastern Standard Time, I will come back and finish our last slides. We will pick up on finishing talking about the wound of betrayal, and then I will leave room for you guys to ask me questions. So happy that you guys joined me. If you didn't catch the first part, go back and watch it. But I will come back at 3 Eastern and we will finish up this teaching. Talk to you guys soon.